I sold my car to pay for my brother's surgery. Not borrowed, not asked to be paid back. Sold. The only thing I owned outright after 3 years of working double shifts at a grocery store while putting myself through community college. The car that got me to work at 5 a.m. when the buses weren't running yet. The car I'd saved for 2 years to buy. I sold it because my brother called me crying at midnight, said the hospital needed a deposit or they'd reschedule his procedure, and I was the only one who picked up the phone. That was 18 months before he stood in my apartment doorway, looked around at my small, clean, carefully arranged life, and said, "God, is this really all you have?" He didn't say it quietly. He said it the way people say things when they want you to hear the meaning underneath, when they want you to feel it land. I want to tell you everything, because I think some of you already know this story. Not the details, but the feeling. The specific exhaustion of being the one in your family who always picks up. The one whose number everyone dials when things go wrong. The one who is somehow, simultaneously, the least valued person in the room. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm 31 years old. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. And for most of my adult life, I believed that love meant making yourself smaller so other people could feel bigger. I believed that because I was taught to believe it. I was taught it so well that by the time I figured out it was a lie, I had already given away most of myself to people who never once asked if I was okay. Let me start at the beginning. Or at least a beginning. My brother, I'll call him Derek, is 4 years older than me. Growing up, Derek was the one our parents talked about at dinner. Derek's grades. Derek's baseball team. Derek's college applications. I don't say this with bitterness anymore. I say it because it's the context. It explains how a family can, without ever meaning to, teach one child that they are the supporting character in someone else's story. Derek was charming. He still is. He's the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately becomes the center of it, not because he demands it, but because people just naturally orbit him. He has an easy laugh and a way of making whoever he's talking to feel seen. I used to wish I could do that. I used to study him at family gatherings, trying to understand what he had that I didn't. What I didn't understand then was that charm without accountability is just manipulation, with better packaging. Derek never asked me for help the way you'd expect someone to ask. He didn't say, "Hey, I need a favor." He created situations. He'd call me and just start talking about how hard things were, about how stressed he was, about how he didn't know what he was going to do, and by the end of the conversation, I would be the one offering. He'd never have to ask. I'd just volunteer myself. And afterward, he'd act like I'd given him a gift, and that feeling, that warm flush of being needed, would carry me for weeks. I see it clearly now. I couldn't see it then. The surgery happened in the fall. Derek had been having abdominal pain for months. Pain he'd been ignoring because he didn't have good insurance, and he kept hoping it would go away. When it didn't, when he finally went to urgent care and they sent him to the ER, and suddenly there was talk of a procedure that needed to happen within the week, the whole family went into crisis mode. My parents are retired and living on a fixed income. My mom has her own health issues. My dad has never been what you'd call financially organized. When Derek called me, he'd already talked to them, and the most they could pull together was $800. The deposit the hospital needed was $2,200. "I just don't know what I'm going to do," Derek said. It was 12:18 a.m. I remember because I looked at my phone when it rang and thought, "This can't be good." "What if I sold my car?" I said. I actually said it first. He didn't ask. I offered. I want you to understand that, because I've turned it over in my mind so many times since trying to figure out who was responsible. And the honest answer is that I walked into it with my eyes open. I just didn't understand yet what I was walking into. I sold my car 3 days later for $2,600. I gave Derek the money. I started taking the bus to work. It added an hour and 15 minutes to my commute each way. In Cincinnati winters, waiting for a bus at 4:45 inches the morning is not a small thing. I wore 2 pairs of socks and kept a hand warmer in each pocket and told myself it was temporary. Derek had the procedure. It went well. He was home in 2 days and back to his normal life in 2 weeks. He texted me a photo of himself eating a burger at his favorite diner. Finally back to normal. "Thanks, sis." 3 words and an exclamation point for $2,600 and 6 months of frozen bus stops. I told myself it was fine. That's what you do when you've been conditioned to be the family's emotional support structure. You tell yourself it's fine, and then you file the hurt somewhere deep where you don't have to look at it. What I should have known is that it never ends. When you prove that you can be the one who shows up, you become the one who is always expected to show up. The debt, the sacrifice, the gift it doesn't create gratitude. It creates appetite. Over the next year, there were other things. Not always money. Sometimes it was time. Derek would invite himself to stay at my apartment when he was having a rough patch with his roommate once for 11 days. He ate my groceries and left dishes in the sink, and borrowed my laptop and forgot to tell me until I was already at work and needed it. He never offered to pay for any of it, and I never asked. There were phone calls late at night when he wanted to process his problems, his job frustrations, his dating life. His complicated feelings about our parents and I would lie in the dark listening, offering what comfort I could, while quietly aware that he never once asked about my life. I was promoted at my job during this period. I became the assistant manager at the nonprofit I worked for. I was really proud of it. I told Derek on the phone one evening and he said, "Oh, nice. Does that mean a raise?" And when I said yes, a small one, he said, "Good, you deserve it." And then moved on to telling me about a conflict he'd had with a coworker. I remember lying in bed that night thinking, I deserve it. Not, I'm proud of you. Not, tell me about it. Just, good, you deserve it, and then nothing. As if my accomplishment was only interesting in relation to what it might mean for my resources. I kept showing up. That's the thing I'm most honest about when I talk to people about this now. I kept choosing to show up, even when everything in me was tired, because the alternative being the person who said no, who set limits, who chose herself felt like becoming someone I didn't recognize. It was December when everything changed. Derek had moved into a new apartment in the fall, a nicer place than he could technically afford, in a neighborhood he'd always wanted to live in. He'd found a roommate to split the rent. But by November, the roommate had backed out, and Derek was suddenly responsible for a rent that was too high for one person. He called me on a Tuesday night. Started the way he always started, just talking, circling, creating the atmosphere of crisis. He'd talked to our parents. Not enough there. He'd looked at his savings. Not enough there either. He was thinking about whether he could negotiate with his landlord, maybe get out of the lease, but that felt drastic. "What do you need?" I asked. I was tired. I had a long day. I didn't have the energy for the slow circle this time. He told me. 2 months of his portion of rent, to give him time to either find a new roommate or save enough to cover it himself. That came to $2,400. Something in me went still. Not cold, exactly, just still. "I need to think about it," I said. There was a pause. That pause told me a lot. Derek wasn't used to me needing time to think. I was the one who offered before he finished asking. "Of course," he said. "Take your time. No pressure." I lay awake that night for a long time, and for the first time, instead of thinking about how to help, I thought about myself. I thought about the car. I thought about the winter bus stops. I thought about the 11 days he'd stayed in my apartment and the groceries and the laptop. I thought about the promotion and good. You deserve it. I thought about all the late-night phone calls where I'd listened for hours and been asked nothing in return. I thought about a question I'd never let myself ask before. What has he ever done for me? The answer took about 4 seconds to arrive, and it was devastating in its smallness. I didn't call him back the next day, or the day after. I told myself I was still thinking, but the truth is I already knew. The thinking wasn't about whether to help. The thinking was about what it meant that I was considering it. What it meant that my first instinct was still yes, even after everything. What it said about who I had allowed myself to become. On the 3rd day, I called him back and told him I couldn't do it. "I'm stretched pretty thin right now," I said. It was partly true. I also just didn't want to give a longer explanation, because I knew how Derek worked, and I knew a longer explanation was just more material for him to negotiate with. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Okay, I figured you might say that." And then, so casually it almost didn't register, he said, "I'll figure it out. I always do, without any help." Without any help. The car, the $2,600, the groceries, the 11 days, the hundreds of hours of phone calls. Without any help. I said, "Okay," and we got off the phone, and I sat on my couch for a very long time. 2 weeks later, Derek drove up to Cincinnati from Columbus, where he'd been visiting a friend. He texted me that morning to say he was going to stop by, which with Derek is not so much a question as a notification. I said okay, because I didn't know yet. What I know now that you're allowed to say now isn't a good time even to family. He arrived on a Saturday afternoon. He'd brought a friend with him, a guy I'd met once or twice, loud in a way that fills up rooms. They came in and Derek immediately started moving through my apartment the way he always did, helping himself to things, opening the refrigerator, sitting down with the ease of someone who feels entirely at home. His friend sat across from me and asked polite questions about my job, my neighborhood. I answered. We were all being normal. Then Derek looked around slowly, deliberately, the way someone does when they want you to notice them looking, and he said, God, is this really all you have? He gestured loosely at my apartment, my small, clean, carefully arranged apartment that I was proud of. The thrift store bookshelf I'd painted a deep green. The gallery wall I'd spent a Sunday afternoon hanging. The plants I kept alive on a windowsill. The couch with the blanket my grandmother made folded over the arm. I mean, he continued, still looking around, you're 31. I just would have thought you'd be further along by now. His friend had gone quiet. There was a particular quality to the silence, the kind that happens when a bystander realizes they're watching something they don't want to be watching. I looked at my brother. He was still scanning my apartment with that expression. Something between pity and amusement, and I felt something move in my chest that I can only describe as a slow shift, like plates of earth moving under the surface. I thought about the car. I thought about 4:45 inches the morning, and 2 pairs of socks and hand warmers. I thought about good, you deserve it and without any help. I thought about the woman I was before I decided that love meant disappearing. And then I did something I've never done before in 31 years of being Derek's little sister. I didn't say anything. I stood up. I walked to my front door. I opened it. And I waited. Derek turned around. He saw my face, and whatever expression I was wearing, it made him change his own. What? You should go, I said. My voice was completely calm. I surprised myself with how calm it was. Are you serious right now? Please take your things. His friend was already getting up, clearly relieved to have an exit. Derek stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his face I'd never seen there before. Not anger. Confusion. Genuine, unguarded confusion. Because I wasn't supposed to do this. I wasn't in the script. You're being dramatic, he said. But he was already picking up his jacket. I didn't answer that. I just held the door. They left. I closed the door behind them. I stood in my hallway with my back against the door and I breathed. The text started about an hour later. First confused, then frustrated, then a long one that was carefully worded to make me feel like the one who had done something wrong. That I'd embarrassed him in front of his friend. That I was being sensitive. That he was just being honest about his observation about my apartment. That I always took things so personally. That maybe I needed to look at why I react this way. I read every word. I set my phone face down on the counter. I made dinner. I watched something I'd been meaning to watch for weeks. I went to bed at a reasonable hour. I didn't respond. My mom called the next day. Derek had talked to her. She wanted to know what happened, in the gentle, worried tone she uses when she's hoping I'll be the one to smooth things over. I told her what he said. Not the history, not the car, not the years of calls and the groceries and the without any help. Just the sentence. The one he said in my living room. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, You know, Derek doesn't always think before he speaks. And that was it. That was the explanation. He doesn't always think before he speaks. I said, I know, Mom. And I got off the phone. And I thought about how many times in my life I'd been handed that sentence like it was an answer. Like not thinking before you speak somehow erases what was spoken. Like the words evaporated because they were impulsive rather than calculated. I started therapy 2 weeks later. This is the part I want to say clearly, because I think it matters. I didn't start therapy because I was falling apart. I started it because for the first time in a long time, I felt something like solid ground under me, and I wanted help understanding how I'd gotten so far from it. The therapist asked me, in our second session, what I got out of my relationship with my brother. I started to answer and then stopped, because I was trying to think of something specific, and I was coming up empty. I sat with the silence for a moment, and then I said, I used to feel needed. And now? She asked. Now I just feel tired. I have not spoken to Derek since that Saturday. It's been 7 months. My mother still calls, and sometimes his name comes up, how he's doing, how things worked out with his apartment. Little updates that she slips in, and then watches to see how I'll respond. I listen. I don't ask follow-up questions. My father called once, about a month in, and asked if I was going to let this go on much longer. I told him I wasn't holding anything, that I simply wasn't available in the same way I used to be. He didn't know what to do with that answer. So we talked about something else and hung up. I want to be honest about what this has cost me too, because I'm not interested in making this sound like a clean story with a satisfying ending. Not talking to my brother means not talking to my brother. It means family holidays have a shape I'm still learning to navigate. It means I sometimes pick up my phone to tell him something, some small, stupid thing that happened during my day, and then remember, and put the phone back down. It turns out loving someone and deciding you can't keep absorbing their damage are not mutually exclusive things. You can do both at the same time. That's the part nobody tells you. They make it sound like the moment you set a limit, you stop caring. That's not how it works. I still care. I just care about myself now too. And for me, that's new enough that it still sometimes feels foreign. What I know is this. I have not overslept a single morning since December, worrying about someone else's crisis. I have not given money I didn't have. I have not sat in the dark at midnight, listening to problems that were never mine to solve. I wake up in my small, clean, carefully arranged apartment, with the green bookshelf, and the gallery wall, and the plants on the windowsill, and my grandmother's blanket on the couch, and I feel something I spent a long time not feeling. I feel like I'm enough. Not in spite of everything I have. Because of it. Derek did send one more message, about 3 months after everything. It was shorter than the others. It said, "I hope you know that I never meant to make you feel like you weren't enough." I genuinely didn't know that's what was happening. I've thought about that message a lot. I think it's probably true. I think Derek genuinely didn't know, because he never had to know. I had made it so easy for him not to know. I had smoothed every surface so thoroughly that there was no friction left, no moment where he had to feel the weight of what he was taking, because I was always there to carry it first. That's the thing about being the one who always gives. You remove the natural consequences that would otherwise teach the people around you how to treat you. You train them, without meaning to take. And then you call it love. I don't know what Derek and I will be someday. Maybe we'll find a version of each other that works better than the one we had. Maybe this distance becomes permanent. I've stopped needing to know the answer. What I know is that last month, I bought another car. Nothing fancy. A used Honda with good tires and a heater that works, and a little dent on the passenger side door that I've decided gives it character. I drove it to work on a cold Tuesday morning. I pulled into the parking lot and I sat for a moment with the engine running and the heat on, and I just let myself feel it. It took me 18 months to get back to something I should have had all along. Some things take longer when you're the one who was always too busy carrying everyone else to carry yourself. But you can get there. I'm proof that you can get there. And if anyone in your life has ever looked around at everything you've built and said, with that particular kind of dismissal, "Is this really all you have? I want you to hear this from me." Open the door. Hold it. Wait. You owe no one a reason. You owe no one an argument. You owe no one access to a life they never helped you build. Just open the door. And let yourself be the one who stays.